Good evening. It's 6 o'clock. We'll call the Planning Commission meeting of Monday, September 18th to order. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Urbani.
Here.
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Gentes.
Here.
Commissioner Hawley.
Here.
Commissioner Stoker. Commissioner Schaefer. Alderman Stralchuk.
Here.
Mayor Nurbin.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Excellent. First up, we have approval of the minutes from July 23rd.
Seconded.
Motion to approve in a second. Any comments, corrections, or otherwise? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? And the minutes are approved. Next up, we have 3 public hearing items. The first is NM Massage and Wellness LLC. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant approval for a therapeutic massage facility for the property located at 10624 Northport Washington Road, number 21, the men's studio.
Move to go into public hearing.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're in public hearing. Is there anyone here tonight who wishes to speak on the matter before us? Seeing none, is there a motion to close public hearing?
Move to close public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And public hearing is closed. Take it away, Jack, giving us the overview on this one.
I didn't push my button. I thought it automatically came on. This is at the back building. You may recall a few months ago we had those in front of us for remodels of those exterior facades on both of those 2 buildings. The square footage is, like you said, 1,400 square feet roughly. There's enough parking there. It's a pretty innocuous use for the neighborhood. We're supportive of the proposal. We would have put it on consent. We just didn't have another item that can put it on consent with, so we recommend approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the planning commissioners? Or if there is none, is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further input, questions? Commissioner Strelchak.
Hey, Jack, just one, I don't have any objection to what's on the table, but it just seems like several of these are pretty simple. Just a massage therapy place in an office building. I think last time Mr. Mickelson came in, I asked if there is maybe something that we can do to just make this an allowable use or, review that. I think that policy item would be something nice to come before us.
Yeah, we are working on some wholesale changes to the Port Washington Road zoning, which will take some time. I mean, if it's something that we could look at it doing a fix to it or not. But that kind of dovetails into other zoning districts and things like that. So it may seem relatively straightforward, but there's a little bit more complexity to it. But we can definitely look at it. I don't really see what conditions we would ever put on them and what we would object to them. So I do agree with you. It's a use that probably should be listed as permitted in the code, but we'll work on it.
Yeah, I don't want to rush anything through that, we wouldn't maybe want to review anyway, but I mean, these have gone just as quickly at every single meeting, and there's really not much room for alarm on these. So
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a similar conversation with Director Talfson on Friday. Just looking at small ways to update things and maybe reflect current community sentiments and reflect, uses that are clearly harmonious with character of Port Road, and this would be one of them. So I think, look for that to come, but I totally agree. Any other comments or input? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And that item is approved. Next up, we have, let me get back to the top. Meyer Helmanack Architecture Design for Concordia University. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant in building and site plan approval to allow for a 15,000 square foot commercial hatchery located in the parcel north of 12800 and 13206 North Lakeshore Drive. This is a public hearing. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
I got a question before we do that. Can we have staff do their readout just so that they can, or do you want to do
I think we're supposed to do the public hearing first and then have staff go. I agree sometimes it's a little clunky, but that's the process.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing, and we have several people signed up, some of which wishing to speak, so we'll get to those first, and then we'll read everyone else into the record. First up is Phil Kepke, who opposes. Did not check if he wishes to speak. Is that true? That's correct. Okay, thank you. 12700 North Lakeshore Drive. Next is Chuck Reynolds, opposes and wishes to speak. 13340 Northwood Lane. Please come up to the podium. Time limit is 5 minutes.
How many minutes?
5,
Well,
because there's others behind
can we
you.
extend that to, no, I'm kidding. All right, so I'm Chuck Reynolds. I live at 13340 Northwood Lane. I've been there for 40 years. And my home abuts the land of the proposed commercial fish hatchery. It is sort of fascinating to see what happens when you get a little yellow card in your mailbox, especially with a hot button issue like building a commercial fish hatchery in a residential neighborhood. The initial reaction from residents when I knocked on doors was almost universally disbelief. No one saw this coming, and why would you? It's a residential neighborhood, for goodness sake. But that disbelief quickly morphed into folks asking questions for which there were no clear answers in the project write-up we were able to view at City Hall. So then what happens? Well, we get lots of guesses and lots of speculation for the next week, hoping that the information that is being revised and is going into the packet clarifies everything. But it doesn't, because not a lot of the information has changed from the initial write-up. Since the land is owned by our neighbor Concordia, a lot of us wondered why the university hadn't reached out to share information with us well in advance of going to the city, rather than this being a total blindside. So like many of you on the commission, as well as our attending aldermen, we are here because there are too many unanswered questions. While the packet is concerned with zoning and architectural requirements, many of us want to know more about the operations and the impact this project will have on the neighborhood. Here are some of the things that we don't know. Who's running the show on this project? Is it Concordia, or is it a private entity? Who is the private entity? Are they a commercial aquaculture company with operations elsewhere? Are they foreign? Are they local? What happens if this is approved and it's a huge success? More hatcheries? Or what happens if it's a bomb? Is it a vacant structure? I know we can't predict those things, but we need to be thinking about the what-ifs in this proposal. What's the source of the water? I have heard several things. I've heard city water, I've heard a well, and I heard a pipe was going to be run from Lake Michigan. What's the water usage? And please don't say a little or not much. We need to know how many gallons are needed, how often they're needed, and has the water usage been calculated and verified? What's the discharge plan? I am not a science major on this, but I think there are two things that come out of a fish hatchery. One is fish and the other is fish poop. I was denied a mound system, and I was forced into putting a holding tank. And rightfully so, when I talk to people, there's a lot of concern about what's being put back into the ground. Are there chemicals, pesticides, antibiotics, fish waste? We'd like to know the analysis of what will be put back into the ground. I must say I'm a little concerned that there are no details in the packet about water usage and discharge, and that the city didn't pursue this more aggressively. I get a strong sense, since the wells are controlled by the DNR and the waste by the county, the city doesn't feel obligated to dig at this deeper. We're the ones living with this. I know that the conditional use requires that if something goes wrong, then it will need to be fixed. But that's the hard part with water and waste. What if it can't be fixed? Another thing I don't know is how the city reaches the conclusion that this project will not injure the value of adjoining or abutting properties. Since we don't have another commercial fish hatchery in Mequon to compare, we'd like to know more about the analysis that was done to reach that conclusion. Certainly, with so much at risk, there must be facts that can be shared to help validate that position. I also don't know why we would consider that a commercial fish hatchery would be harmonious and compatible with the rest of the neighborhood. Since when is a commercial fish hatchery compatible with single-family homes? This is so rare and so odd that even the city needed to seek legal opinion to see if the use was even permitted. So while there's a lot we don't know, here's one thing I do know. By many measures, the city has been very thoughtful on land use. Taking steps years ago to zone land outside the sewer district, R1 residential, 5 acres, was brilliant. It's helped maintain a rural residential Mequon in many places. It's helped attract folks to invest and live in Mequon. It's helped to build the tax base, and it's certainly helped to conserve and manage natural resources. If you look at Mequon, east of I-43 from its southern border, and you go all the way north to Highway C, it's residential zoning. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of a commercial business operating east of I-43. There are permitted uses and then appropriate uses. I've heard references at meetings just like this one where statements by city representatives are made where a building design or an ask for rezoning is couched with, is it appropriate? Is it not compatible? Or is it in sync with the surrounding area? Well, this whole area north and south of Highland and east of I-43 is single-family homes. Why suddenly would we think allowing a commercial fish hatchery in a residential neighborhood to be an appropriate land use? And finally, here's one thing I believe. There must be a million places in Mequon that would be more suitable for a commercial fish hatchery. In fact, we can travel less than 1 mile. All we got to do is cross I-43 to the East Growth Corridor, where the city is targeting new development. The hatchery could very well be the spark that's needed over there, and a spot where a commercial fish hatchery can be compatible and harmonious with other commercial businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Next, we have Dan Bradley, who opposes and wishes to speak, 344 West Bonnywell Road.
My friend Chuck is a hard act to follow. That was excellent. I'm Dan Bradley. My wife and I have lived at 344 West Bonnywell for the past 42 years. I'm here tonight to express my opposition to the fish hatchery. And the reason for that, it is not an appropriate use of the property, or at least it is not use specifically addressed in the city plan. I looked at the charter of the Planning Commission, and I believe that, and I was one once, by the way, a planning commissioner. I believe it was to support the city master plan. Nowhere in the master plan does it mention hatcheries, and the only time it mentions fishing is for sport fishing. It is difficult to imagine how this development would enhance the quality of life and benefit anyone but a small selected group of individuals. I have a few specifics I'd like to address. First of all, the impact on neighbors. There are 2 neighbor houses that are within 400 feet of the proposed facility. Now that's pretty close. It sounds like a long ways, but 400 feet is not very far, a little over a football field. Others are in sight line of the building. In other words, when they look west towards the sunset, they will see the building or they will see the landscaping around the building, and they'll realize it's there. They will also see the glow of the security lights and so forth. The facility would just be another CUW disruption of what was once a quiet rural neighborhood. What's the impact on wildlife? Currently, this wonderful open space is a refuge for geese, deer, and sandhill cranes, and whether you like them or not, coyotes, and wild turkeys also. And this area is currently used by the farmer who leases the land from Concordia for the production of hay. What impact would this facility have on the environment? Chuck mentioned several things, and I'm going to go a little further and say, you know, well water usage would be, is unknown how much, but it would certainly have an effect on the aquifer. You know, the average household uses about 5,000 gallons of water a month, unless they have an external watering system and sprinkler system. And so I'm sure this would use more than 5,000 gallons a month. I do not see any figures that justified what this usage would be, but Dan Sam at Concordia thought the proposal might use city water, which is not what was in the packet that came from development. Waste disposal is another huge issue. There's water, there's solids, including dead fish. You know what? If you've ever owned an aquarium, fish die, especially if there's millions of them in small tanks. And what do you do with them? Well, you have to have a truck come and remove it. So how often would a truck have to visit and remove refuse from outside the facility? Also, as Chuck mentioned, they use chemicals and pharmaceuticals in raising fish in a fish hatchery, because otherwise diseases like fin rot and so forth can take over and wipe out a complete load of fish. So what happens to those antibiotics? You know, they always complain about humans taking antibiotics and that a lot of it goes into the sewer system. And what do you do when you have a 10,000 or a 50,000 gallon tank full of antibiotic-laced water? Also, a mound system doesn't seem possible to accommodate the amount of water and refuse that would be coming, and therefore could contaminate groundwater. What's the impact on the quality of life? Although perhaps it's limited, this would certainly add to the light pollution already produced by CUW. Our dark skies are already eliminated by parking lot and stadium lighting. It used to be dark on that side of town. Potential for odor. You know, a small aquarium, if you've ever owned one, smells. What do you think a big aquarium does? It smells a lot. So there's a big chance, and you've got to ventilate that out of the building. You can't completely filter it. And there's also the potential for truck and visitor traffic in and out of the facility. So there are many unanswered questions, like Chuck said. Is this going to be a fish hatchery or a fish farm? Dr. Sem indicated that they might produce fish that could be used for food. In other words, maybe take them over to the cafeteria at CUW. So that's a fish farm, not a fish hatchery. How would Mequon benefit from the development? I can't foresee any benefit to the city of Mequon or the residents. Where will the water come from and how much? I mentioned that before. What will be the tax status of this property? Is it going to be tax exempt because it's institutional property, or is it going to be a commercial building with property taxes? And bottom line is, aren't there less obtrusive uses for this land with a rural zoning of 5 acres? So tonight I ask the commission to deny the request outright rather than to table it on a path to acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Next, we have Patrick Rochford, 104 West River Forest Drive, who opposes and wishes to speak.
Thank you. My name's Patrick Rochford, 1407 West River Forest Drive. It's a block south of Highland, a block west of, half block west of Port Washington. I agree completely with Chuck and Dan. First of all, they've set the groundwork, but now my own take. First of all, a bit of history. We built our home in '82, the same year that John Book bought Concordia to Mequon, and the same year that the DeMarsh brothers introduced the Highland House. So all three of us have grown together and prospered and happy. There were no water mains, but we did have a fire tank across the street and sewer service which flowed west from our house to the Oro Lane branch. Our well was 220 feet deep with a high draw static water level of 60 to 70 feet. There's always water 2 or 3 feet down, but the sustainable level is 60 to 70 feet. We hung our pump at 120 feet, so we had 60 feet of clear water in a 10-inch pipe, okay? Columbia St. Mary's Hospital came in 1994 with a big well and 2 honey wagons of waste every day trucked up to Cedarburg. I don't think Cedarburg's ever forgiven us for that. In just over a year, 1995, we had to have our pump dropped to 180 feet. That's from the 120 feet. A city engineer at that time noted that test wells in the area, which I still don't know where the test wells are or were already showing a cone of depression, quote, quote, because of the increased well drawdown by Columbia St. Mary's. A facilities person at Concordia confirmed that they, too, were having some issues. Initially, the sisters who had the property did have a small wastewater facility, but 8 nuns and 75 girls were no match for the flushing, washing, showering, eating, drinking, blah, 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 of students and staff of a full university. In August of 1999, again 4 years later, our well went dry. We had to have it rebored. We went down to a depth of 424 feet. Static water level at that time was at 120 feet. Bom, 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 bom. It keeps dropping. A new pump was then hung at 205 feet. Columbia St. Mary's built a force line sewer. That's one because they didn't have the gravity flow at that time. They were pushing this stinky stuff with pumps, and boy, it did stink. They built a force line sewer, and Mequon bought Milwaukee water in from the southwest by Oriole Lane School, and from the north, that's the Milwaukee water, and North Shore water came up Port Washington Road, and they met at Columbia St. Mary's. I'm rehashing much of this for you as commissioners and for the audience too, because I found out talking to people there's so much history lost, okay? Concordia hooked to a sewer and also did city water, as did Newcastle Place. Now for part 2, the natural watershed is from the Lake Bluff to the west. One major drainage path and accompanying stream easement is from Concordia's property under the railroad, under I-43, through Northwest Retention or Newcastle Retention Pond, under Port Road and Dorothy to form the south and west boundaries of my property. Then they go off to the middle of River Forest Drive down to Willow Park and Milwaukee River, etc. There's a second watershed that flows into Ulao. So I have 2 issues of concern. Where are they going to get the water, as you've heard before, and what are they going to do with the wastewater? Little fishes need lots of water, not the nasty city water with fluoride and chlorine, but spring water or well water. And you can't dump the used water in the sewer. Both the city and MMSD have been using video to inspect our sewers to assure that minimal surfaced water incursion. The stuff we send in Milwaukee should only be brown water or black water. The other stuff, not so much. Sewers are for those types of things, and we pay, as a community, we pay for any excess. So I went online to learn about the obscure topic of fish hatcheries. There's only about 6,000 to 10,000 entries. I could have spent, anyhow. Every state DNR and every university every university in Wisconsin has some kind of connection to a fish hatchery. The state has 11 fish hatcheries, and I've got an item here. The DNR's fish hatchery, egg collection facilities, and rearing stations raise millions of fish to be stocked every year in lakes and rivers where there's little or no natural reproduction, etc. We have one of the finest freshwater studies programs in the nation right here at UWM, right down the block. And Concordia is working with UWM, MSOE, and other in Marquette. All the universities here are working together with trading programs. What did I find out online? Number 1, hatchery water should always be first use, preferably from an isolated, uncontaminated spring or well or borehole. Stream or river waters may often become turbid with fine particles, and such conditions are not ideal for hatching eggs or rearing alevins. I've got this, I can cite all this stuff later. Secondly, different hatching systems may demand different water flows, but as a general rule, a minimum flow of 4 to 6 liters per minute per 100,000 eggs at temperatures below 59 degrees is recommended. That's a lot of water, okay? That's a lot of water, all right? And then 3, fish hatcheries even rely more heavily on steady water quality than fish farms due to the sensitivity of fry and fingerlings, okay? Lastly, while I dearly love walleye, 35 years flying fishing in Canada, I'm a walleye lover, okay? But I'd rather go up there to get it than across the street, all right? And I love Concordia as a neighbor as well as for what they do. But is this an appropriate use of their institutional purpose? And if there's Concordia reps in the audience, my back's to you, I'm sorry about that. Is this an appropriate use of your institutional purpose, of your institutional mandate, of your institutional mission? This is not like loaves and fishes. I know it sounds like fishes, but this ain't biblical, okay? Why should they house a for-profit fish hatchery? Don't tell me it, quote, enhances their student experience or pharmacy program or ecology center. That's not right. Something's going on here. Selfishly, I don't want my water table to be drawn down, and I don't want additional fish poop in my drainage easement. I guess that's about it. Made my summary statements. Fish hatcheries make bad water, okay? They take good water and make bad water out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rochford. We have one more resident who is signed up to speak, and I'll read the rest of the names when we're done. Matt Zerniak? Sorry. Is the last one's the right one? Sorry about that. 13451 North Lake.
I am not as well put together with him, but I absolutely love that data. That has got to be jaw-dropping to see that amount of a water table drop with just, and I'm just flabbergasted by that. But I was talking to my kids about this on our way here, and the first thing that my little guy said is, we're going to lose all of our water, and our plants won't be able to grow. Now, maybe not to that extreme, it won't be on that top level, but when you start taking water from everyone else, how are we going to be affected, and how can we ensure that things down the road that they did can be rectified if the water table keeps dropping? I think you guys are kind of aware of what happened with the central sands of Wisconsin and all those deep water wells there. That didn't go well in general. So this is just another addition of taking fresh water where it really doesn't need to come from in a community. And this is small, it's a neighborhood. I looked at our website for the city of Mequon, and I was kind of surprised that it didn't have like a little, welcome to Mequon, where we're next to the city and there's rolling waters and large yards and things like that. There was nothing, and I was kind of surprised by that because that's what I think Mequon is. I think it's small families. I think we have the opportunity to have yards, I love that my kids get to go outside and play. We go over there and we fly kites actually over there quite often. Now, I also was an engineer at Stevens Point as a paper engineer. That's all about water. Water in, water out, a little bit of wood in, a little bit of paper out, and it's all water. Now, when you see that they have their retention pond, I don't know if you guys know what that is. That's just a bunch of waste sitting there waiting for things to settle. And if you were to drive past that map right there, just to the south of it, you see that little wood lot. That is always underwater if you guys drive past there. I know all of my residents go past there. That is constantly water. And I don't know if it's deemed wetlands or not. I won't get into that, but I know that it is very wet there almost year round. And I would have big concerns of their spillage going into that. That then brings in rodents, other things. Last night, some sirens were going by and you hear the coyotes going already. Now you're gonna be bringing in even more, you know, not even, I don't know what I'm trying to get, riffraff or whatever else you want to say. Environmentally, you're starting to bring things into my yard, and that could affect my family. I also went to Iowa, and when I would drive to school in Iowa, I went past hog confinements. Guess what they smelled like? Hogs. I also grew up in Wisconsin, where I live next to farms. Guess what farms smell like? Farms. I also go fishing a lot with my kids, and when we catch fish, what do our hands smell like? Fish. I don't know how you can say, ironically, it's the Chinooks, and I guess if you're downwind from there, the name will be, you know, the irony will be quite thick, but it's just, why would you put it there? Like, it's a community. I don't think any of you guys would want a fish shack next to your house. When you go up north and you go fishing, where do they put the fish shack? Way away from everyone else that it's not near their house because you smell it. I get that there's going to be, I don't even know the technology now of fish, and I imagine there's a lot of recycled water, but there's still going to be drawing water in. That means water will be going out. Not just water, but that's going to be with all the wastes that we've already talked about. And with that waste is the odor and everything else. So I don't have all the numbers that they have. I have 2 kids that we use that property all the time. I don't mind. I love that. I like the idea that we're bringing in companies, and I like that idea, but I don't think the location is ideal. I kind of laughed when I saw it when my neighbor told me about this. I thought it was kind of a joke. But it's serious, and here I am. So I want you to take in consideration, I oppose this order for my kids, for my safety, for my health, and for my community. Thank you.
Thank you. We have several people who have signed up in opposition but did not wish to speak. If you change your mind, just raise your hand when I read your name. Corley Davis, 13633 North Lakeshore Drive, opposes and does not wish to speak. James Schaefer, 13446 North Lakewood Drive, opposes, does not wish to speak. Diane Hubner opposes, does not wish to speak. 13212 North Lakeshore Drive. Frank Sandberg opposes, does not wish to speak. 524 West Shady Lane. Barbara Sandberg, also of 524 West Shady Lane, opposes and does not wish to speak. Jason Pokroy, opposes and not wish to speak. 13314 North Lakewood Drive. Pam and Jean Mesikalski, thank you. 13206 North Lakeshore Drive, opposes, does not wish to speak, says too little information available. Kathy and Dick Todd, opposed, do not wish to speak. 13450 North Lakewood. Is there anyone else who didn't fill out a card who wants to come to the podium at this time? Yes, ma'am. Come forward. Just state your name and address so they can record into the record.
Yes, good evening. Good evening. My name is Raquel Lehman. My husband Michael would have been here with me, but unfortunately he was pulled away on business urgently today. Why that's relevant is that he is actually a geotechnical engineer. That's what he does for a living, which makes him an expert of the water table. So he gave me a very long list of things that I was to say at this meeting, which were covered by most of the residents that spoke here. So the only one that I would add to it, as you read through the residents that oppose this situation, number of those residents have young children, just like Matt here. And those young children, if they got into that detention basin, that poses a drowning hazard. So that is one other additional point to make as it relates to the situation, the water table notwithstanding, of course. But I do want to go on record, I am at 13551 North Lakewood Drive, and I do oppose this for all of the reasons that the gentlemen here have explained. I don't have the 40-year history that Chuck or Dan or I think Patrick do, but I do love the neighborhood in which I live, and the people that are there are just that, a neighborhood, and I do think a commercial structure will certainly change the nature of that neighborhood. So, on record, I oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wishes to speak before we close public hearing? Well, there's all of a sudden 3. Please come forward. The other 2, please fill out cards to help Robin out here, because she'll take your name and address, but
My name is Bob Drucker. I live at 12402 North Lakeshore Drive. I've been there for 25 years. I didn't get here in time to sign the yellow sheet. I don't wish to speak, but I want to go on record as opposing the project. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Who's next? You can just introduce yourself and give their card to
My
Robin
name is Jim
afterwards.
Johnson, live at 13518 North Lakewood, and I oppose the program as it stands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? If so, come to the podium. Otherwise, you can just give your card and marking in opposition or in favor if there's anyone.
I didn't get to finish my
Hand
card,
into
but
Robin. No,
Hello?
thanks. Is that just get closer to the mic? It's a little
hello.
sensitive. There you go. Perfect.
My name is Nikki Patterson, and I am a resident of 13837 North Lakeshore Drive. My husband and I moved there 7 years ago, and we are that young family, as discussed. I have 2 sweet little boys and another one on the way. And my largest concern is our water table and the water that we drink. You read news articles all across the country about contaminated water, and science is only just now catching up to all of the PFAS and other things that are in our water without us knowing. We don't know enough yet about what this is going to do to our drinking water. This is our only option. I don't have another option to bring in city water. This is all well water. Additionally, as mentioned, our soil is not great for drainage, so many of us have holding tanks. That is very different than a septic tank. So my holding tank holds the water. I have to have it pumped out every 4 weeks because our ground is already saturated with water that I can't have a mound where it can leach out the water into the area. I don't know what, as discussed, the neighbors here to the south, it is always flooded. I mean, I can only imagine the water or the soil there is also saturated like mine and would require some sort of holding tank or something similar so that, again, the wastewater, the fish poop, et cetera, isn't leaching out into essentially already standing water in that area. And similarly, this is Mequon. This is a very residential part of Mequon. When we chose this place to raise our family, I envisioned raising them among other families, having my kids ride up and down the street and riding their bikes and raising them with other families. Never did I imagine that we would be just a stone's throw up the hill from a fish hatchery. Like many others stated today, this is not a compatible use with this particular area. I don't object to the analysis that your city attorney presented, but it is not compatible with this neighborhood. It is a neighborhood, not a commercial operation, and I do not agree that this is for institutional purposes. This is a for-profit company hitching its back on the institution there. I would also say that Concordia keeps growing larger and larger, and I don't know all the statutes and rules about open space, but at what point is Concordia too big for its envelope? I love this open space area as a great buffer, especially given that the stadium is right on the other side of those trees. This is a great open space area that kind of buffers our residential area around this institutional envelope. So again, my name is Nikki Patterson, and I oppose this use. Thank you.
See, we have one more. Please come forward, sir. Tell us your name and address.
I wasn't going to speak, but you just hit a our neighbor who they bought their home from the Cooks.
Sir, please speak into the mic and
And,
start with your name. Please start with your
and-
name and address so we can record it in the record.
I'm at 524 West Shady Lane. Frank Sandberg. Several years ago, we had a normal septic system. And then it flooded, and it flooded, and it flooded. We have so much water running down our street that I remember we had water this deep. I've been there for 50 years. We had water this deep. We couldn't go outside our house. I had to put a holding tank in at a great cost. But I was pumping that septic system because it no longer worked. And I was on a sandbar. It doesn't make sense that they know everything there and this situation, and they think they can have a filter, something to filter their water. It's not going to work. We get lots of rain. Thank you.
Are there any more people who wish to speak? Seeing none, is there a motion to close public hearing?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor of closing public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are back in regular session. Does staff want to?
So how do you want to handle this? We can answer questions at this point, or we can, it's up to you.
I'll start out with just a few words, and then we'll get into staff presentation. I think, is the applicant here present?
Yes.
Please come up and take a spot over here on the other side. So just a few thoughts after hearing all that. I believe there's a bit of a misnomer with the tagging this as a commercial fish hatchery. They are commercial in nature because they're not run by the state. This is an agricultural facility, and all agriculture is in it to make money. No one farms because they want to lose money. So this is an agricultural overlay district, which allows certain types of agricultural uses, and this one is listed as a conditional use in the district for which it's zoned. We're not talking about rezoning. So it's a conditional use in this zoning district. We're also not here tonight to debate rezoning the property or to debate the wisdom of previous councils who rezoned it R1 with the agriculture overlay. That's what happened. That's what the property is. It's been that way for, I don't know, when was it? The 1990s when
At least.
it was all rezoned R1OA. The zoning that's on that property it's a property right that the owner carries. The owner happens to be Concordia. So we're not here to really judge why the site was selected. It's their land. They're bringing forth a proposal for how it is zoned. We also need to be careful under Wisconsin state statutes. Conditional uses have to have a compelling and clear reason why they shouldn't be approved. Some of those could be things like noise, traffic, smells, odors, certain things like that, but we can't arbitrarily say we don't like it, therefore you can't have it. There's very clear law that the city could get themselves in trouble on. So be specific. I see a lawyer shaking his head up and down. We're also not really here to question who owns it or who leases it. That actually doesn't matter. Only the zoning matters. I am interested with some of the operational information, as many of the residents are, about water, how you plan to deal with the waste, things like that. And yes, the DNR does regulate wells. That doesn't mean we're not interested in it generally. And I think the wastewater is a perfectly acceptable question to ask. What happens with all that? There's just not enough info in the packet, and I think people want to know. And I have the distinction as maybe the only person other than maybe the applicants here who's ever worked at a fish hatchery. I worked at one between my freshman and sophomore year at the fish hatchery in Spooner, Wisconsin. We raised 120,000 muskies. My job was to collect the food for the muskie all summer long. And you can't smell a fish hatchery. They don't make noise. They'd hardly make a peep, and in fact, that fish hatchery is right next to a residential neighborhood in Spooner, Wisconsin. With that, take it away, Jack, and then we'll try to answer some of the questions as best we can as we go.
Sure, you addressed some of the things I was going to address, so I'll just try to stick with the report and a couple other things. I did want to mention, though, that I asked the city attorney to provide a legal memo, not because staff was confused about the use in the district. We just wanted to verify because we felt this probably would be a contentious issue, so we wanted to make sure we had his memo in there so that it had guidance for the rest of the commission to understand. In terms of the use itself, I have the site plan up on the screen. I will show you the ortho. So just to give you a better context of the area. So here's Concordia's main campus in this location here. And this is the area that the hatchery will go. It's proposed up in this front corner right in this location here. The parcel Concordia owns, as you can see, is 30 acres in size. And then there's the additional parcel to the north that's 35 acres in size. These are both zoned R1 OA with the agricultural OA. There are also other parcels farther to the north up in this area. There's an active farm operations way up to the north. So anything in Mequon, basically, that's in the rural areas has the OA for 10 acres or more. And we see this throughout the western part of the city as well. Even the southern half of this Concordia's facility is zoned R1 OA as well. So, and under the R1 OA, again, like the mayor said, there's a certain amount of uses that are allowed by right in terms of agricultural, so dairy farming, chicken farming, raising of crops, tree farming, those are all permitted by right. They don't even need city approval for any of that. So there are other conditional uses that we typically see, and many of us have seen it here, landscape contractors or horse academies, riding arenas, things like that. Those are conditional, and we've seen those in the past. So we have to look at the proposal in relation to what could be there from the agricultural standpoint and what we've seen in the past in terms of what conditional uses we've approved and what conditions we placed on them. As the mayor said, again, this building is, all the operations are within the 15,000 square foot of the building. There's very little traffic to the site. The stormwater pond, I think if there's issues, concerns with that, Cole can address. It is outside the sewer boundary, so it will be on a well and on a mound system or some other septic system, and Cole can address those issues as well. There was a question about lighting. The only lighting that's proposed, there is some building lighting at the front and on the side. There is no full parking lot lights. All the lights that are proposed are full cutoff fixtures, so there won't be a lot of glare coming off this building. So in terms of impact, I don't really see much in terms of landscaping or lighting. They submit a landscaping plan, as you can see in front of you. It's not a formal plan. We don't really want to treat this as a formal plan. We want to see it more agricultural, so we did allow for some foundation plantings and some screening along the front of the road, but we wanted to keep it in a natural state as much as possible. Where we kind of had a little bit of an issue was with the design of the building. Since this is the OA agricultural overlay, we wanted to keep it in keeping with agricultural buildings. I just need to turn this one. So we worked with the applicant. They've had a couple modifications. Originally, they did not have any shed dormers or windows on the building. It looked rather industrial. So we asked them to do some improvements to the building. They did add some windows on the sides of the building, and it's hard to see on this rendering, but there's some shed dormers on each side of the building. And we felt that made an improvement to the building, but we're still not quite there yet. The applicant has stated they're willing to continue to work with us, but they wanted to get this use issue addressed first before they went any further in the process, which is understandable. They also provide a couple different color schemes that were in the packet. I think staff prefers a scheme D, which is a lighter material. It gives a better look to the building. So we're asking for this portion of the project to be tabled, and we come back and work with them on future changes to the building to give it a little bit more architectural feel. Other than that, again, there's not a lot that takes place outside the building. This is a rather innocuous use for the area in terms of the impact of the fish hatchery on the surrounding property. One neighbor was correct. The nearest home is about roughly 400 feet to the south. But the structure's, again, it's a story and a half at the most. It won't have a lot of view to the surrounding area. And that alone, having a view of that structure is not injurious to the value of that property. I mean, there also could be barns out there. There could be storage facilities for livestock, for cattle, things like that. Again, other than this issue of the well and potentially the discharge of the septic system, we don't find the use to be objectionable for this location. I guess I can turn it over to Cole if you want to get some more information on some of that issue. But other than that, we do recommend approval of the conditional use and tabling of the building and site plan.
Sorry, let's go to engineering and get an overview on those aspects, and then maybe over to the applicant.
Sure. Like you said, Mayor, I mean, there were a lot of questions about the water usage, water table. There weren't numbers or data on water usage, and maybe that's something that the applicant can shed some light on. The city does not have, I guess, jurisdiction or reviewing jurisdiction of the water usage if it's outside of our city-owned water facilities. We don't have a hydrogeologist on staff to review those kind of things, but that
Is that
certainly
the
doesn't
sole
mean...
responsibility of the DNR?
Correct, yeah. And that certainly doesn't mean we can't reach out to DNR to see how they review things, how they review water usage, and look at the water table. But I just don't have that information tonight, unfortunately. For the septic system, Ozaki County does review that, as you mentioned as well. There were a couple of concerns about the soil and the soils in the area. The county would look at those soils and look at the soils of where the septic system is proposed and ensure that based on the soil types that the system is designed properly, sized properly, because if you don't get a higher infiltration rate, then you need to make the system bigger so it can accommodate what's going to it. And then the last thing that is a city review piece, there were a couple questions about that pond on the south side, actually up on the screen here. Just to clarify, that is actually what's called a bioretention basin. That is dry in most cases, unless it's raining very hard. It's actually like a sandy bottom, so it promotes infiltration to the ground, and it's not typically, there's no water level in it, so shouldn't be too much of a concern for safety and things like that.
And that's strictly for stormwater runoff?
Correct, just for stormwater runoff, correct.
Thanks for that clarification. I think there's maybe some misconception about what that feature was for.
Right, and I
But
think that's all I
any
had.
project that goes through Mequon that has, I think, 5,000 square feet or greater of soil disruption has to have a stormwater management plan, and we find lots of similar features or ones that permanently have water in them in other areas to deal with stormwater runoff. So that's all from engineering?
Correct.
I guess, does anyone have any questions, or should we kick it over to the applicant? Give us a kind of, I think we get the building and the use, and what can you answer more about what the operations are like and how the water is used? Is it recycled? Is it continuously drawn? How do you get rid of the waste? Some of those questions that the public had, because I think those are big concerns. You will need to, I think, push to talk. If the green light's on, your mic is hot.
Is he live?
Yep. Just might want to get it a little closer.
Okay.
They
We'll
are going to
ourselves.
introduce themselves now. They have not spoken yet.
I am the Dan Sem that was referred to. I'm Associate Vice President for Research and Innovation at Concordia University.
My name is Jack Fury. I'm a Cedarburg resident. I'm currently, I was the owner of Fury Filter and Pump, and in the process of retiring right now, and I am going to be running this facility.
Mayor, if this is on, architect, lived in the city for 36 years, and don't anymore, unfortunately. Part of the team, at least from the architecture standpoint.
Sorry, is your mic on? Is the green light on?
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Cliff Mayer, architect, and community member for 36 years in Mequon. I've worked with the university for many, many years, and am just part of this project to make sure that it fits in the community, and that obviously we do things appropriately from the comments we heard from the neighbors.
Yeah. So I'll try to answer some of the questions that were raised. I think probably the most pressing one, questions about water usage and source. So it'll be a deeper aquifer that we will be drilling a well in terms of, and Jack and Cliff can talk about specifics of that, but it'll be deeper, so a different aquifer. In terms of the quantity of water, so when we undertook this project, and I can talk about why if you're curious, but we contracted with engineering firm McMillan and Jacobs, who did the fish facility for UW-Stevens Point up in Duluth, and we visited that facility to see what something like this looks like. Our chief financial officer and chief operating officer were worried about smell. We assured him there was no smell from fish hatcheries and farms, but we visited the Duluth facility, which was much larger than ours, and there was no odor at all, so can confirm that. In terms of the usage, we're looking at having tanks that are in the drawings of about, 45,427 gallons. So we have exact numbers for that. We're looking to recycle the water, so we're not going to be kind of constant flow through, so it would be 5 to 10% per day. So that would be just makeup water. So that's about 4,500 gallons a day. So 45,000 gallons is about the size of 2 in-ground swimming pools for perspective. At any point in time, we'd be using maybe, 3.15 gallons per minute on average. So we do have detailed numbers. I apologize they weren't in the report, but we contracted with a firm to get all of those. Jack can maybe talk about how we'll be handling the effluent. But just to comment, why is Concordia doing this? So my mandate at Concordia, I'm overseeing research and innovation for the university and wanting to involve our students in research activities. We have a faculty member who's really a prominent figure in fish biology in Wisconsin. He came from UW-Milwaukee and has connections at Stevens Point. He works out of our Center for Environmental Stewardship, and we wanted to sort of leverage and expand the skills that he has to the benefit of our students who are interested in careers in fish husbandry and that sort of thing. So our students would be doing internships in this building, but it's true, it will be a commercial building focused on growing walleye to 5-inch fingerling size. We'll have a smaller tank where we grow them to larger food fish. But really, we're going to ship the fingerlings off to another facility for the grow out because we don't want to have a big footprint on that space. We're specifically sending them to a company that's a partner of ours. So we will be breeding the fish in cycles of 6 times per year. That's some of the science that goes behind this, is affecting the environment, the lighting and the temperature, so that they will breed more frequently. So you can expect 6 times per year there would be maybe a pickup-sized truck shipping out 5-inch fingerlings to another facility for grow out. So there won't be a lot of traffic. Like I said, every 2 months we'll be shipping them out for grow out. The owner of the business, it is essentially a spin-out company from Concordia that Jack Fury here is going to be CEO of, and they'll be leasing the land from us to run the fish business. We are a part owner in that business, but Jack is investing his own money and will be running it as an expert who's a very successful businessman and entrepreneur. And frankly, I think our students are going to learn a lot from working with somebody like that. So those are all the questions I can remember. But Jack, do you want to talk about the effluent?
Again, my name is Jack Fury, and again, I've run a business for the last 38 years, and the innovation of this project is truly what has driven me to want to do this. The impact is negligible. The water usage is negligible. The waste is negligible. And I had my notes, no one wanted to hear that, but it truly is innovative with the process that Concordia came up, and food is the future, and that's what brought my interest into it. The water usage is just makeup. And we plan on digging a deep well, but that water usage per day is evaporation. Otherwise, we're recycling 100% of it, filtering 100% of it, 0 chemicals. So even in waste, whatever, there's 0 chemicals, 0 smell. the discharge from the fish is minimal. And if we are approved with a mound system or whatever, that waste is probably going to require a pump out tank once every 3 to 5 months. A 5,000 gallon tanker will take the solids from the waste stream. So waste is minimal.
So the waste is planned to go out to a septic field?
That's how most all fish hatcheries do it right now is they sell the water because it's nutrient filled water. In fact, most people use it as plant grow out facilities. There's several facilities in Wisconsin right now with the fish hatchery. They grow vegetables just off of the water. So it's nutrient enriched water.
There was some worry about chemicals and antibiotics. So one of the kind of value propositions in terms of a business of growing the walleye inside in a controlled environment as opposed to a lake or a pond is you control exposure to bacteria. And so there's not a need so much for antibiotics and things like that. And that's why the fish that are grown internally in facilities are more valued and prized as they're healthier. So we wouldn't have to treat them with chemicals.
Just purifying the water other ways, ultraviolet, things like that.
And controlling exposure, like people won't be allowed to just walk through. You have to kind of disinfect and booty up. There will be a viewing area, but we have to control exposure of the fish to bacteria.
Quasi clean room type access. It's interesting. So the discharge, any waste from the fish just goes down into the septic field, if I hear that correctly. Okay. Not spread out on the ground.
Sir?
Not spread out on the ground. I think there's concerns that it will be pumped into the field. Okay, so that's not the case. Do you happen to know how deep what aquifer you're tapping into, at what depth?
I think the current well at Concordia is, I believe, like 680 feet, and they pretty much cut their usage off of that well. It's like in half because they have city water now. So they're way less than what they were, and we'd probably be in that 600 to 700 foot aquifer out there. So we're trying to stay away from the aquifer that the residents are currently on.
We're planning to just use Concordia's old well they're not using anymore, or not using as much?
It's possible. Where their well is and where this facility is, we'd have to dig up a lot of stuff and get a pipe over there. But
Okay. So not the exact same one. Okay. I think that answers the questions on water usage, where it's coming from and where it's going when you're done. Are there any questions from the rest of the commissioners? I'm sure there's probably a few. Commissioner Stroker.
I apologize.
Yeah.
A typical residential home has their mound system pumped every 2 years, so it sounds like you're going to be 4 times that use of a single-family residential, which makes sense to me. What about the dead fish? Do those get flushed into the system, and do those get pumped out with the typical mound, the holding tank, or is there a different process if there would be dead fish?
haven't thought about that, and we're hoping not to have dead fish. So through the survey and everything that we've done, I mean, we're taking basically mom and dad, and we're raising them in tanks. So it's 6 cycles a year. So we're taking mom and dad, we're breeding them. Walleyes only breed once a year. So we're taking them right from eggs to fry, and growing them out to a 6-inch size. And the quantity of fish that we're doing, I mean, this is kind of micro scale. We're only going to be producing maybe 200,000 fish a year compared to any fish hatchery that's nothing. And I'm probably overstating the pump out rate. It's probably going to be somewhere more in the 8 months range is my guess. But to your question, dead fish, I might have to get back to you on that. But
that's fine.
The where we lose the most fish is between the hatching stage, and once we get them to like 1 inch, that survival rate goes up to like 80%. So we're hoping not to have any dead fish.
And if you wanted exact data on how many dead fish are projected, we actually have that. I just don't have it off the top of my head. But we have a bio plan where they calculated projected mortality rate. And like Jack said, they tend to die much more so early on. Later on, not so much. And at that point, they're like half an inch or so.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure there's no impression that the residents, there's not going to be dump trucks full of dead fish coming out of this place. It sounds like most of it's going to go into the sanitary system and will get pumped out of the holding tanks like any other solids, human waste or anything else. The other thing that I just want to kind of relate and maybe clarify and make sure I understood this correctly. I believe one of you said you're talking about 4,500 to 5,000 gallons of water a day, which is similar to a single-family residential home. So we're not looking at putting tons of water into this on a daily basis. Was that a correct statement? Or obviously you have to fill the tanks. I understand that. But can you clarify that?
Yeah, that's a solid number, 4,500 gallons per day. That's
a month for residential. He's saying a day.
Oh, a month, yeah. So it's more, yeah, 4,500 per day for
Fair enough.
the recycling.
That's why I wanted the clarification. Thank you. I think that's all I've got for now.
Commissioner Urbani.
Along with that, the water usage, you said it was 45,000 gallon tanks. How many tanks would there be in the building? It was hard to zoom in on.
It's in the drawing there. It's probably like 20 or 30.
Several pages
Well,
up.
there's not 20 45,000 gallon tanks. There's 45,000 gallons
the
of tanks.
The total volume of all the tanks.
Total volume is 45,000. Thank you. Okay. And it was, and then clarifying again, the 4,500.
Yeah.
And you said it was 3.51 gallons per minute for the
Yeah, that's the
refill.
Right.
Okay.
Commissioner Strelchak.
First of all, thank you everyone for coming out and expressing your thoughts and concerns about this. This is your neighborhood, so I've heard what you've said and want to make sure that I at least summarize what I'm hearing your concerns are. I'm hearing that concern number one is well usage. Number two is the waste. Where does it go? Chemicals was addressed. The smell, the visual impact of the building as it relates to, let's say, setbacks and things like that. And is there any city insight over the usage with the well and what can we do there? It sounds like we're vetting out several of the items. I'm gonna make decisions here based on whether or not I'd be comfortable with this in my neighborhood or just on the other side of homes in my other neighborhood, maybe where the dairy farm is currently and things like that. I know that we're a little limited, as Mayor Nurbin shared, with the fact that it is agricultural use and there is this is a conditional use, so we need a true reason to say no to this versus just simple opinion. Hey, do we like it? Do we not like it? Am I hearing it correctly, or is there anything that I missed? Just usually I don't ask for public feedback or just a quick shout out. Okay, I just want to make sure that we go through it. So well usage, we're at about 45,000 gallons per day.
Wait a minute.
4,500.
4,500 per day.
45,000 gallons.
That was a test,
Yep.
right?
Yep, sorry. 45,000 gallons are all the tanks. You fill those up. You fill those up once. You fill those up annually. What is the, how often does that happen? I'm a walleye fisherman, so I got a lot of questions just because I'm curious and, you know, also to really dive deeper into understanding what the potential use is in this neighborhood.
Right. We would do that 3 to 6 times per year where we would refill the tanks. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So 4,500 per day, and then 3 to 6 times per year we would refill the tanks.
If the well usage was becoming burdensome on the other wells in the area, how would you get the water in?
I think those numbers weren't. Have to dig another well.
Yeah, my understanding is it's sounding like it's a different aquifer. I'm not an expert in an aquifer. I guess I'm going to ask the city at least looks into this just due to the amount of water usage for a relatively small facility. Yeah. You know what I mean? You know, my ask of city staff is just that there's some city oversight on the water usage, that we really do our due diligence. And if we find any concerns, you know, that whether this is approved or not, it's immediately brought back to just be reviewed. I'm concerned about that generally because I don't know, and the residents here don't know. So I want to, as an alderman and somebody that's voting on this, I want to look them in the eyes and say that I've had people vet it properly and we're comfortable with all the information that we have. So Jack, is there anything that we can do to at least address this?
Well, I mean, we can reach out to the DNR again to see what standards there, or if there's any concern. I mean, we've dealt with this over several other projects in this area over the last several years. Most of them have been coincidentally going from the R108 to higher residential densities, which they've been objected to on a rezoning basis because of the concern of the wells. And at that time, there was information provided that, again, this is a DNR issue. We don't really have much say in the matter. We can follow up with them just to verify if there's any concerns or how this would work if there was an issue that you're bringing up, and see what the rectification of that is. So that's something we can definitely do. It's hard because, again, we don't get, and former Alderman Gierl was big on the aquifers, and we even tried with, you know, monitoring irrigation systems on residential properties. We don't do that either. So people can run their irrigation systems nonstop if they want. We don't really have control over any of that because we don't control the usage of the wells. So that becomes a difficult process, but we can at least get the information from the DNR in terms of how this would work and what would happen if there was issues.
Next item was the waste. Currently, that's being pumped to septic, assuming that's approved, and that'll get pumped out on occasion. I definitely, as we vote on this, if we do choose to approve tonight, I definitely want to know where the dead fish go. I mean, just so you know, a walleye when it hatches is a 1/2 inch long and paper thin. So if they lose 20% of a 1/2 inch long and paper thin walleye, that's not a large volume, and that's not going to sit in a dumpster. It's not even big enough to move to a dumpster. That would go, my understanding is into the septic. So that's correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then they grow to 5 inches. How long does that take? Because everything I read is it's 6 months to a year, but I don't know if that's natural reproduction or if that is in basically a lab, which is essentially what you're looking to put in.
From the hatch to that 6 inch, it's anywhere between 6 and 8 months.
Okay, so 6 to 8 months. Okay, and it said 6 months to a year, so I'm assuming in ideal conditions, like you're proposing, that would be the case. The smell. Can we just talk about the smell in other areas? I have a friend who does solar. He went to 5 different locations in Michigan, 5 different hatcheries, of which they had significantly larger fishes and significantly larger hatcheries. I specifically asked him just so that I could tell you tonight that I did my due diligence. I talked to a friend. I'm like, hey, talk to me. Be honest. Did it smell? Did it smell a little? Did it smell a lot? And he says, I couldn't smell anything, and I'm pretty sensitive to it. So everything that I'm hearing from people that have gone and people that have worked in there, we had a little conversation before, and we're hearing from the applicant, but again, we always do our due diligence to check based on what applicants share. is that this smell isn't, you're gonna have a worse smell coming from the lake during the alewife die-off, and we all know that that's pretty wicked, especially certain times of year. What is it, June, July, that happens? And I just got logged out, hold on. So can we just talk about the smell and if, you know, what, if anything, you're doing to mitigate that and how that's going to be minimized with, you know, this facility?
Well, and maybe Jack can comment as well, but that relying heavily on our firm, McMillan and Jacobs, who focus just on fish hatcheries and fish farms. That's what they do, and so they're aware of the concern, and it was a concern of our leadership at Concordia, and they assured us there is no smell. We went to the facility that they built in Duluth, or there was no significant smell. They even had something that I'm not sure we're considering here, but they had a holding pond where they would collect the waste and let it settle, which is something I think people were worried about, but there wasn't even smell for that. So that, if anything's going to smell, that seems to me what would smell. So I don't know, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I've visited 6, maybe 7 facilities myself, and maybe I don't have the best nose in the world, but I surely couldn't smell anything from any of those facilities.
Okay. And that's what I heard from my friend, and as well as the mayor shared, that there wasn't smell at the Muskie one that he was at. That I think covers most of my questions. Oh, future expansion. That was the next thing. If this goes well, which we hope that it does, if you do get approved, because anything that gets approved in Mequon, we want to see people succeed at. If this does go well, what are future plans for additional facilities? What I don't feel is appropriate for the neighborhood, I'm going to just tell you up front, is multiple buildings that are pulling that much water from the ground near a residential neighborhood without some real due diligence. So what are future uses and future expansion?
Well, first off, our President Ankerberg, who couldn't be here tonight, he doesn't want a big expansion in terms of the focus for the university. The reason we're having this small facility here is it relies a little bit on the kind of science that you have at a university, and so we're only there because we can benefit from being close to a university where there's a kind of research capability. If this is really going to scale in a big commercial way, that'll happen off-site. That's already been said. I think our president doesn't want it bigger. In terms of the growing out to food fish, that is for sure happening at another location. Jack is part of that project. And if we needed to grow more 5-inch fingerlings than we could do here, we're not planning on doing it here. Did you want to add to that, Jack?
No, I think you covered it. The grow out facility is going to be, I believe it's Columbia County. And if there is an expansion and we need more fingerling fish, they have plenty of room there to do it.
Can you talk a little bit, some of the conception from the group is that this is going to be like a fish tank at home, it's going to be murky water, it's going to, you know, I think that's where some of the concern for smell is. Can you just talk a little bit about the filtration and how it goes through the filtration process? Just
a little bit, and also would be happy to host anybody who wants to see our current walleye facility in the Center for Environmental Stewardship, which is on the north end of our campus, where we're growing walleye right now, and essentially on a small scale what we're doing here. And the water, the tanks are very clean as well.
I'm in.
Highly filtered. There's biofiltration that goes on, so there's like in an aquarium, there's naturally occurring bacteria that are on the beads and the biofilters, and it sort of breaks down the waste and the water and that sort of thing. There's a lot of filtration that goes in the line with the tanks, and the water is quite high quality. In fact, that's one of the things we're paying our engineers a lot for is to get high quality water.
The water isn't clear. We have to actually put clay in the water to cloud it up, because walleyes are ferocious and they'll eat each other. So we got to artificially put clay in there to make it cloudy so they don't kill each other.
Yeah, they cannibalize their young, so So we actually create clay and we add it to the water then. But once they're older and there's not the chance of eating each other, then the water's clear.
Interesting. Any further questions, Commissioner Strelchek?
No, that covered the list that I had there. I don't think I left anything
Saw
out.
another comment over here from Commissioner Jensis.
One of the concerns that was addressed briefly earlier was some questions about the operating company, the for-profit entity, and I'm wondering if I can ask a few questions about the structure of the entity and just to help clarify for people how the entity will be structured and its purpose. Am I correct in assuming that this is going to be kind of the traditional research offshoot type of model where the university will be in control of the entity and will retain control, or is that not the case?
Well, and we're working out all the details. We're actually forming a company that will be a Wisconsin, probably LLC rather than corporation. Jack is the main founder and funder, but Concordia, through a subsidiary of our foundation, will have equity in this also. And so there will be a board that manages this entity that we're forming, and Jack will be on the board. I will probably be on the board representing Concordia, and we'll have governance through that kind of mechanism. Is that more or less, Jack? Is that?
Yeah, and the number of employees, we're probably going to have a maximum of 4 employees. So there's not going to be a lot of in and out traffic. And it's going to be a 24-hour facility because we got to maintain the fish and keep an eye on them.
My question goes more to, and you've answered part of it, and I appreciate it in terms of the ownership structure. Any prospect for, I'm assuming not, given the size of the entity and the operation, but any prospect for outside investors, private equity or something like that coming in, or is this really more of a, as I'm thinking of it, a business that has a research base but a for-profit offshoot?
Well, it's kind of all of that. So we probably need a little bit more money. We already have somebody in mind who's a partner, and he does construction, and an investor that'll put in some money, but we'll retain the majority ownership and board control. In fact, that's something that Jack reasonably wants, is to make sure that he has full control. If we're planning on bringing on one investor in the next few months to get the rest of the money for this, but do it in such a way where Jack maintains control. And Concordia is telling me, and I must listen, that that we need to have control over what happens in this building. So if heaven forbid, the fish initiative does not work, we can't put anything else in there necessarily. It has to be that. So Concordia, just like maybe some other people are worried, what if the fish project doesn't work out? What's going to happen there? Well, we're not going to just put any business there. It's got to be that. So, and we're leasing the use of that land to the entity that is being formed with Jack, the company. So,
thank you.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yeah, this kind of follows up on a question in my mind related to this is as a sort of a partnership or what have you. Simply, is there a change in the tax base that will be going to the city as part of this?
I'm not a tax lawyer, but when I've talked to them, this is percentage square footage wise of our property, not significant enough for that to be a problem. The entity itself is a for-profit and paying taxes, but I don't really want to hear that. Well, the entity itself that's formed, it will pay taxes, but you're probably asking about property taxes.
That is correct. I'm interested in terms of what revenue difference there may be.
This is not zoned IPS, so it's zoned 1 acre residential with agriculture overlay. So if there's a building and there's improvements, that'll come with it some amount of taxes, but we're not proving. So we're not after the revenue.
Right, but I understand, but it would be a routine treatment then in this case for the tax.
Yeah, per the zoning. Yeah.
Per the zoning. And I guess just a statement, I appreciate all the discussion that there's been, and I'm agreeing and following with it. And I think my only emphasis would be some follow-up with the DNR.
There are several conditions of approval. Someone could add a condition of final approval of DNR well permit and subsequent waste discharge permit from the county. I think we don't handle that, but they have to do it anyway, but we could certainly list it as a condition. Commissioner Stoker.
I just want to follow up on the water usage again, because I know, and I'll be honest with you, when I walked in here tonight, that was probably the biggest thing that was going to sway me from approving this. But I just did some math. An average residential sprinkler system for a 1 acre lot uses between 5,000 and 8,000 gallons per day. So if you have 2 lots that water every other day, that's 175,000 gallons a month. 2 1 acre lots that have residential sprinkler systems. They're using 130,000 in a month. So the water use is infinitesimal. It's a very, very, very small amount of water. How is that wrong?
I think Commissioner Stoker comment was not based off of household usage, as if there was a sprinkler system.
This is
running.
the sprinkler system, just a sprinkler system for a 1 acre lot. If you have an in-ground sprinkler system, like I do on my 1 acre lot that I water every other day.
It's not every day.
I understand that. I understand that. But guys, we're not talking about millions and millions of gallons of water here. This is an infinitesimal amount this is a very, very small amount of water. And I think there's fear-mongering here that we're all worried that we're going to dry up an aquifer. When you look at this, if this 15-acre parcel had 15 houses on it and they were using sprinklers all summer long, I would argue that the 15 houses are going to use far more water than this.
I agree.
When I would also address that permitted uses under the zoning, you could have farming operations with irrigation systems that we don't regulate whatsoever. I think that's a big issue here we have to make sure we understand is that this parcel is zoned R108, and people may not agree with that zoning, it's appropriate or not, but that's what it is. And I did some quick math. You could have 600 chickens, 30 cows, and 12 hogs on this size parcel. And so when we talk about issues of smell and waste, I mean, again, under the permitted use in the OA zone, you could have a lot more objectionable uses and higher water users than what we're seeing here with this proposal.
And smell. And smell.
Sure it does.
Commissioner Hawley.
I'm just going to echo what Jack just said, and that I came in here really kind of with the same questions. I don't live too far from this. I had a lot of questions about the water. I had a lot of questions about the discharge of the water. But what Jack said is right, and that is permitted use under this zoning. And you have to be careful because they could put a barn there with a ton of cows and pigs, and there would be nothing you could do about it. I think given the choice, you'd rather have this. So we do hear everything that you're saying, but you have to understand that we're very limited in what we can deny, because if it is permitted under the zoning, we have to have a very good reason to not allow it.
Commissioner Schaefer had her hand up.
Anytime Concordia is on the agenda, there's a full house in this room. And I've said this many times, on paper Concordia is such a great neighbor, and I do think some of the literal neighbors have alluded to that as well. Concordia, there's many great things about having Concordia in our community. And whenever issues come up, and this is not unique to Concordia, it's just that happens to be an institution that has done several different projects of development in recent years, but whenever there is zoning that butts up that was my hand gesture, against two different types of zoning that butt up against each other, that's when we have these types of questions and concerns, and rightfully so, right? Similar to what Alderman Stralchek said, I put myself in the shoes of the neighbors many times when there's things like this where it's a conditional use, and think about how would I feel. Two things. Thank you to everyone who reached out. So there were many more people who emailed than those who spoke. Sorry, is there a side conversation?
If people need to have a conversation, they can go out and close the doors, please. We're trying to let the commissioners speak here.
Thank you. I'm particularly grateful for those who approach us with well thought questions and concerns, and not just, you should vote no because I don't like this, right? That's certainly less persuasive. I am going to come up, I'm getting around to a motion, and I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I'm going to make it anyway. I do think that your new alderman had been aware of this and had reached out and suggested, rightfully, that perhaps the university could reach out to the neighbors in advance of this, because I do think that many of the questions that many of you posed in email and posed today when you spoke were addressed when the applicant came to the table. You may not like the answers, but many of them were answered. So I do think in general, that's just such a good, you can take this to whomever. I'm looking at you just because you're the Concordia representative, but in general, given the sensitivity of proximity to residential areas, any goodwill gestures and diligence that can be done with the surrounding neighbors before a project comes forward pays forward in dividends, because I think it would have addressed some of these questions. Doesn't mean that it's going to change people's minds. Mr. Fury, I know of you, and I know you have run a great business. I actually know your son, and I know the work that you've done for our youth hockey organization in the community, and you have a very strong reputation, and so I feel more comfortable knowing that you would be the one in charge of it. And yet, my recommendation and the motion I'm going to make is to table, and the reason why is I think that there could be additional, given the amount of concern and given some of the still outstanding questions around around the aquifer, and I know that that's kind of passing the buck a little bit to the city and then eventually to the DNR, which adds complexity. The dead fish, as small as they might be, I think that still is a question that if I were a neighbor, would want to have addressed. So perhaps there can be some additional education. You had kindly offered to have people tour the existing facility. That's done on a smaller scale. If I were a neighbor, I would surely take advantage of that and try to educate myself, because it's so easy to have a strong fear-based reaction when something's going to change. I've done it. I've been in those seats. And yet, I think the responsible thing to do is to try to educate as much as possible. Might not change your mind, but at least you'll be better informed than you were going in. So my motion is to table this.
Before there's a second, because then it becomes non-debatable, does anyone else have any comments or questions? Commissioner Strelchak.
I agree with your motion to table, but I like to vet as much as I can now before bringing it back up so that we can have all of our questions answered. Jack, if you could comment on what the density would be allowed if it was a 40-acre hobby farm. There were some questions as to building size. It's 15,000 square feet. To me, it doesn't seem unreasonable for an ag farm, but I want to just verify that that's well within the range. I did look up when you had the setbacks set, and it looks like it's set back further from the property line, which is something I always look for as a commissioner or an alderman on any plans coming forward.
Yeah, it's a 30-acre parcel. I mean, you could have multiple. I mean, if you look at some of our established farms in the western part of the city, we have buildings, 4 or 5 buildings that are 15,000 square feet on individual properties. I mean, at 30 acres, you're getting a lot of buildings under a floor area ratio or an open space ratio. You're not going to hit that. So, again, you could have a numerous number of buildings. You could have numerous number of animals. And in fact, for livestock or animals or buildings that house livestock, you only have to be 100 feet from a property line. So you could have a livestock building that is closer to the property line than this currently is being proposed. So I think, again, and nobody's saying that they're going to go and do this overnight, but you know, these are things we've actually run into numerous times out in the western portion of Mequon when it's kind of in reverse, where people build a subdivision and all of a sudden they don't like the smell of the neighbor's farm. They have rights too. They're permitted. They have, they have their farming operations. They run them and they're legit. So there's not much we can do about it. So those are the things we need to look at when we're looking at this land as being zoned with the agricultural overlay. Again, we can disagree whether that's appropriate or not, but that's the case we have right now, and that's the application that we have in front of us. So, yeah, you could have multiple buildings that are large. We've had horse riding academy arenas that have been probably that size in the past that were approved on OA properties.
Go right ahead.
The water is going to be the big sticking point, and I think it's one of the biggest sticking points for the residents. So what can we add as a condition to have a study of the aquifer to verify the DNR position and possibly challenge the difference in opinion on behalf of the city?
Let me, before you ask that question, I calculated this in a manner that's easier for the average person to understand.
Great.
So you're a swimmer, Olympic-sized swimming pool, 660,000 gallons. At their rate of water usage, it'll take 4.5 months, including the times they fill the tanks, to fill an Olympic swimming pool. So it'll happen just under 3 times a year. That's it. One pool, 4.5 months. Gives you an idea of the size of volume of water.
Okay. And then the only other thing that came up with a dairy farm in the area was the question of runoff as it relates to runoff into Lake Michigan. So I just want to, like, as a staff condition, just address any topical or chance of topical application of fish fertilizer for the farm and things like that, just to make sure. I mean, it's fish waste going into Lake Michigan, but I know there's some concerns with the dairy farm running into the river and running into the lake. So I wanted to just...
Well, that gets into a little bit, I mean, from a purely like pavement issue runoff, we control that through the bio retention facility. But if they decide to use whatever waste product comes out of this for fertilizing the rest of the agriculture, that's something, again, we don't regulate that. I mean, other farms use other products with, waste and manure in them for fertilization. That, again, will fall upon the DNR whether they're allowed to do that or not. That's not, again, something we could do. You can make it a condition to prohibit that usage as part of conditional use. I think that's a valid condition. You could say that no waste produced by this facility shall be used to spread across the fields or something like that. You could do that. I think that's a legitimate condition we can add on that. But other than that, we don't typically regulate that.
I think that would be a worthwhile addition if someone was going to make a motion to approve that included that. But certainly as it stands today, a permitted use would be bringing in cattle, and then there would be all sorts of stuff on top of the ground that you may not want. Are there any other comments or questions? Anyone would like to make a statement or another motion or second the motion we have on the floor?
I guess the difficult question is if it does go down the route of tabling, I just would need to know what kind of quantifiable data that we're looking for from the DNR with regard to the well. That's the hard part.
I don't know that they will ever give us such data. This is my only hesitation. I don't know what they normally provide, but I think they will probably approve your well and say you can build it, but they're not going to do an exhaustive study of the aquifer, is my guess. I don't know, maybe Cole knows better in engineering.
I think you're correct. I mean, they probably don't do an exhaustive look at the aquifer unless it's a high capacity well, which I think is like 100,000 gallons a day, and that would be for something like
a golf course.
Yeah, or maybe,
we've certainly had trouble with those, but
maybe even a highly irrigating farm or something like that. But I mean, we could see if there's some sort of I don't know if Concordia could offer like some sort of analysis on water usage, and I mean, look at the aquifer in that regard, some sort of report like that, but just an option.
I think they tried to give us a good overview of that here, but none of us are professional well drilling experts. Well, maybe some of us are, I don't know. Any other questions, a motion or a second on the motion that's on the floor? Commissioner Urbani.
I have a comment. I think one of the more helpful paragraphs in the packet was the definition from our city attorney about comparing fish hatchery and fish farm. Because when I first saw this on the agenda and I started seeing all the emails, they echoed all of the same questions that I had and concerns. And I don't want this to become a fish farm. I don't know how to prevent that. I don't know how to write that or create something where it is not stray into the land of fish farm, because I think that's a totally different connotation and a totally different use that wraps in a lot of those negative connotations, such as the antibiotics, which would spill out into the environment, kind of a thing. So if there's any way to make this never a fish farm, how do you do that? I think this is a much preferable use. I used to live next to a pig farm. You could tell which way the wind was blowing because they do stink. So I think this is a preferable use to a lot of the other allowed uses.
Go ahead if you'd like to add something.
Well, I mean, to grow them to food fish would require probably 10 times the size facility. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't unless we changed the whole scope of what we're talking about here. We have one large tank in the whole building just to sort of see if we're able to grow out large fish. But to actually, grow to food fish, it's a whole nother scope that my president won't even allow it. He doesn't want something that big here. That's why we're doing it in probably Janesville, it looks like. So, because, the density for growing to 4 or 5 inch fish is an order of magnitude different than growing them to a pound and a half or so.
Well, you're probably talking external ponds and all sorts of things at that point.
Yeah.
The grow facility, just in comparison, it's a minimum of 30,000 square foot building.
So if you wanted to add a condition that, you have a very small test footprint, other than for research purposes, but not for, no growing of them to food size for sale. It's for research purposes.
So can we add a condition that says will not allow any external ponds on the property?
Other than the stormwater pond?
External fish holding ponds?
Well, I think you have some authority two ways. Number one, this is a conditional use grant, so if there's any expansion, you're going to review the expansion. Number two, the code dictates commercial hatchery, and the commission has the authority to say, no, a fish farm does not fall under that category, so we won't even entertain or approve that type of use there. So I think you have the ability to do that. If the code listed that as a conditional use, I think it'd be less, but there's nothing in the code that I've seen that says fish farm. It specifically says commercial hatchery.
It's almost contained within the definition.
Yes.
But I think the addition of a no external holding tank, surface grade, tank would be a good one. I think they'd be willing to accept the condition as well, because I don't think they plan to have one. Okay, that's a potential motion. We've got a motion on the floor. Commissioner Stoker.
I don't understand Robert's rules. Can we have a second motion when there's an?
Yeah, there's no formal motion because we have a motion with no second. So you can make a motion. And
so I will make a motion to approve per staff's recommendations to add the language that there is not going to be any external fish holding tanks or ponds allowed. And we'll also be tabling in this motion the portion regarding the building.
Then Rob had a condition of adding no
spreading of fish waste or carcasses on the property.
Okay, and an additional condition of no spreading fish waste on the remaining acreage or of the property anywhere. Or dead fish.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? Go right ahead. Ask a question. Yep. Commissioner Charles.
So with regards to the aquifer, is there anything else that we can reasonably add as a condition that would set the residents at ease? Because that would be the only other thing that I'd be more comfortable voting yes for something with that in it versus not.
I mean, you can add a condition of review and approval of the DNR, but you're gonna get that anyway, but if you wanna just add it as a belt suspenders condition, that's fine too. I just don't know what else you could add other than to quantify the impact. I mean, that's something I don't think has been done.
Difficult because we don't have any code standards directly related to that. So we're without a quantifiable standard of our own to point to. And that is what it is. Motion and a second. Commissioner Schaefer.
Sorry, I don't want to believe it also. I've never had a well. I've always had city water and sewer. What is an average depth of well, if there is such a thing as an average for a residence? Is that, and maybe that's an ignorant question. It is ignorant because is there an average? Is the 680?
Because there's not even one aquifer. There's multiple different
Right.
aquifers.
So 680 to me sounds very deep. It is. So I'm wondering if, on average, if residential. 300. Okay. 300. Thank you.
I used to have one that was only 120, but.
Yeah, they can vary, but I think the average would be somewhere around 250 to 300.
So likely this is different than most of the residences. Thank you.
Commissioner Hall, you have any? Okay,
My well is 400. I asked Art Liebau. He drilled it himself. He said our well is 400.
Perfect. That's an awful deep one for a private well. 605. Who's got a high score here? I think Commissioner Stoker has a high score. All right, any other questions? We have a motion and a second. There are no further questions. Please call the roll.
Okay.
It was. First draft recommendations.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Urbani.
No.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yes.
Commissioner Hawley.
Aye.
Commissioner Gentes.
Aye.
Commissioner Schaefer.
No.
Commissioner Stoker.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak.
Aye.
Mayor Nurbin.
Aye.
Vote passes 6-2, sorry.
All right, that concludes this item. On to our last item. It is also a public hearing item designed to construct for Sagrio. The applicant is seeking a conditional use grant, building site plan, and sign waiver approval for a proposed 4,382 square foot two-story building for the property located at 10404 North Port Washington Road, the Refresh Aesthetic Center, formerly known as Ferrante's.
Give him 2 minutes.
Motion to go into public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone here this evening that wishes to speak about this item? Seeing none, is there a motion to close public hearing?
So moved.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And we're back. Who's taking this one? Oh, introduce yourself, the new guy.
Yeah, the new guy.
Awesome. Nice to meet you. I haven't met you yet.
Oh, well, nice to meet you. I'm Evan. So this is Refresh Aesthetic Center in the site of the old Ferrante's. A little context, there's Goodyear Tire and Life Storage to the direct north, Chalet Motel to the west, Clark Gas Station, Baymont Hotel, and a planned restaurant to the direct south. And then there's a vacant lot and I-43 to the east with an industrial building across I-43. The narrative that was supplied to staff, it's a relocation of existing business from Whitefish Bay to 10404 North Port Wash. It's a new freestanding building, 2 stories, 4,300 square feet. Their office hours are on the bottom there, 9 a.m., 5 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, 9 a.m. to 7, 9 a.m. to 5 on Friday, and 9 a.m. to 3 on Saturday. More about staff, there's 9 employees and 9 administrators and 9 clinical providers on staff, and approximately 40% of those are full-time. For the site plan, they're asking for a number of waivers to this property due to its size and relation to the right-of-way on that corner. It is kind of tight. For the parking, they have 31 spaces provided for in the plan, and based on the parking minimums in the code, they would need 36 spaces on their staff level at capacity. The applicant asserts that with 14 staff on site, the number of customers is only going to be about 10 at a max. So that'd be 24 stalls and leaving them 7 to kind of have in reserve. The lot size is already too small for the zoning district, and especially the buildable area is only about half an acre, and the lot size minimum for B1 is already 1.5 acres, so they're at kind of a deficiency there. For the open space, it's only reduced by less than 1%, so it's a pretty small reduction. Setbacks and offsets, there's going to be kind of multiple violations and waivers needed. It's especially kind of true on that west side towards Port Wash. It's just such a big right-of-way that you would need a pretty large setback from there. That would be 30 feet needed, and right now it's at 0. And it's kind of a pretty large improvement from what Ferrante's already has on site, where it's pretty close to that corner already. I think you can see, I think it's kind of right there. You can see that it's pretty close to both Port Wash and Donges Bay. So it's getting set back further from at least Donges Bay and kind of a little bit more kiltered towards the east from Ferrante's as well. Continued, the applicant initially had a dumpster enclosure kind of in the middle rear of the site at the back of the parking lot close to the building. Staff kind of thought it would be beneficial to move that further towards the east where it'd be screened by more landscaping. And then with the inclusion of the sidewalk, we kind of want that straightened out and completed towards, kind of directly towards the corner of Port and Donges Bay, and kind of getting away from that driveway thing that's going on right in the front. The applicant has agreed to dedicate the right-of-way to the city and county, so the property's far into the right-of-way already on both Donges Bay and Port. And conversations with the applicant indicated that there's interest in doing that to install the sidewalk, and the refresh would be responsible for maintaining the landscaping within the right-of-way that they put in. It's this way there's a right turn lane that's possible for westward on Donges Bay, and just being able to accommodate that would be beneficial for both the city and for refresh. And then the dedication agreements to be written up in the conditional approval as well. Sure.
Back to the actual plan. So I just want to clarify, just make sure we're all on the same page. So basically, right now, the property line extends into the road. And then the Ferrante's building as well within that's ultimate right-of-way. So our code requires for any new construction to take place, you have to use the ultimate right-of-way line, which is this line here, to determine where you start your setback numbers. Now, they don't have to dedicate it to us. They're willing to do so, which we're appreciative of, but that's where we would start the setback. So basically, from this point, we would go over 65 feet for a building. Unless there's parking in front, it would be 95 feet. And then these would be another 95 feet off of this side and 30 off this side and 30 off this side. You'd end up with very little area to do anything. This is kind of similar to what we saw with that bank proposal at Sullivan's. So we fully understand there's a need for waivers on this site in order to accommodate really a building of this size, or really any size that's going to be a marketable building. So we're supportive of that. And we're also supportive of the fact that since they are dedicating this right away, it allows us to do some of the Port Washington Road improvements that we did when we undertook the study with regard to beautification. So we thought at first we would just leave this as grass, but we need that sidewalk to continue. So they're getting rid of the right in, right out driveway access point, but we don't want to put the sidewalk in this location. So we want it to actually match where it matches into public storage, which is way back in here, and it'll come basically this way, and then it'll bend and come in here and that's something that we'll do temporarily. And since it's off their property, we'll use TIF funding to cover the cost of that. We don't feel that they should burden that cost. And Evan will show you there will be some landscaping though in the front, which then we'll have on our property when they dedicate it, but we'll have an agreement with regard to how that works in terms of the dedication, so that they still can maintain that that landscaping on our property in perpetuity. I don't see any changes to the Port Washington Road width. I think that's probably going to be as is going in the future. There may be a possibility at one point for the Donges Bay to get a right turn lane that may squeeze that a little bit, but I think we have enough room there, and we actually asked them to push that building back, parking lot and building further to the north by 5 feet. So I just want to clarify, I also wanted to state that this is a permitted use based on the use, but the conditional use is required for the waivers. So I'll turn it back to Evan. Thanks.
Yeah, so for the landscape plan, they're installing pretty large street trees along Donges Bay and some other large trees inside the parking lot, kind of by the driveway entrance, and also kind of along the northeast corner over there by the dumpster enclosure. There's a variety of shrubs and flowers around the perimeter of the building. The plan meets the 30% shading requirement, the 10% parking lot landscaping. The trees need at least 2.5-inch caliper. There's a couple trees on there that do not meet that. I think they're in there as GLTDR and GIBPS, and those just need to be changed to at least 2.5-inch caliper trees, and then staff review and approval of the landscape plan after Plan Commission approval is going to be needed. So that's just kind of the palette of different plants that they have. You can see the larger canopy trees on the side are pretty acceptable and don't cause a detriment to the site at all, and provide a lot of shading. For the lighting plan, the average is 1.9-foot candles. 2.0 is the average or the standard. The difference is effectively impossible to tell from the naked eye. The uniformity ratio is not met. That's just with 0.0 and 0.1 readings included at the lot line. And just upon review, the distribution of the light looks quite even from the lighting plan. And then staff review and approval on this is needed as well. Elevations, these are kind of the architectural elevations. The actual renderings that are on the next slide are a bit more clear. Yeah, so for building design and architecture, this is kind of a box-style building, which has been historically kind of unpopular or met with some criticism from residents of Mequon. The PNC Bank and Associated Bank are two examples of this. There was also a number of materials used from a kind of Sioux City brick, which is kind of that grayish brick on the bottom, then a kind of aluminum stone siding on the top, with just that kind of more cinder block looking siding. And then there's some aluminum siding kind of right in front of that entrance on the south side, which is the top image, colored and kind of styled to look walnut wood. And then there's a kind of a canopy architectural element next to that, and that's surrounded by, what's it called? It's kind of, it almost looks limestone-ish. What was that? Natural stone, kind of a tan, khaki kind of looking color. There are caps on the first floor windows and the ledge halfway up, kind of breaking up that gray. The windows on each side of the building, the west side has arched windows, while the east side maintains kind of a boxed window style. And then the east facade is kind of devoid of those architectural features that are featured on the west, north, and south sides. Oh, yeah. So then, finally, there's a sign waiver that's going to be needed for a monument sign on the southwest corner. Right now, it's 4 feet from Port Washington Road's ultimate right-of-way line and 7 feet 4 inches from Donges Bay's, and that the standard would be 10 feet from each. And because of the large right-of-way, the monument side would be still a fairly moderate distance from the street and not very. It wouldn't be on the street or anywhere super close.
Not too much to add. Very quickly, the access, as Jack mentioned, was being proposed for being removed off of Port Washington Road, which we are in favor of, just with it being so close to the intersection. They're proposing the access on Donges Bay Road, which, if you guys recall before, with the existing one, it's very, very wide. It's a little bit of the Wild West where cars drive out, so we're definitely in favor of the rebuild there. Other things to note, they'll be tying into public sewer and water. That'll require some permits from the county to go into Port Washington Road. Otherwise, just our standard permit language.
I will echo your assessment of calling it the Wild West. I drive through there frequently, and it's certain times of night it's a gamble what you get back there. It's died down quite a bit since Sobelman's has closed, but it'll be an improvement to have a dedicated entrance and exit. And this isn't, I'll talk about it here, but it's not really something for the applicant to worry about, but maybe something in our TIF. When you come over the crest of I-43 and come down there, if there's traffic backed up, you really can't get a sense for it until you're right on top of it. So I don't know if this would be something we want to look at when we do the public improvements to Port Road. That's certainly close enough to the TIF. It's still in the TIF. Maybe, I don't know if the DOT has advanced warning beacons. Like I've seen them other places where there's a stop light ahead that could be coordinated with the intersection to give someone coming over the freeway to the west advance warning. I thought about that when reviewing this packet. It's not for you to worry about at all, but it's kind of related to the public improvements we are going to execute. I won't even say might, that we're going to execute at some point in the near future. So just take that and write it and put it on a list for later. But
we'll keep that in mind, and hopefully that's outside the DOT's cone of influence, because we haven't had good luck with them working with advanced warning beacons.
You don't say. We've had
anything
such
else?
good luck with rapid flashing beacons over here on Mequon Road. Yeah.
If they need one, it's probably because they're going too fast.
Well, yeah, we could all hope that people will slow down, or we could just accept that people are never going to slow down. I mean, as much as I would like everyone to follow the speed limit, people just don't. And
now
try to make it as safe as possible.
As a former DOT employee and traffic engineer, I will say that communities generally are open to those suggestions, but cautiously applied. So I think it's something to very much keep in mind, not that to sound assuring that it would be done, but indeed there can be valid reasons for sight distance.
Anyway, back to the item before us.
And I would just also add, I think Commissioner Chorn, who couldn't be here this evening, we did email you his comments regarding the architecture, and I think it echoed some of staff's concerns. So I guess we'll just leave it open to the commissioners. If you have any questions or critique of the architecture, we can kind of have a conversation about that as we go forward.
Commissioner Strelchak.
Is that an invitation?
Yes.
You raised your hand, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
ask a question and we'll get a reply. Go ahead.
All right. Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Hertzfeld from Design to Construct. I'd like to address first of all, the site explanation was perfect. It's a really small site. It got even smaller when we did the dedication. So while it sounds like we're asking for a lot with all the variances, it really makes that site somewhat developable for us. As it relates to the architecture, I understand that staff is concerned about the boxy nature of the building. Just looking in our immediate neighborhood, within a half a mile of us, there are 7 other buildings that have this style, the box style of building. Our direct neighbor is a large, gigantic storage building that just remodeled itself. It has the wood style siding that we're proposing on our building. It's just north of the tire store. Yeah, the large storage.
Yeah, life
facility.
storage.
Yep.
Just to let you know, we begrudgingly accepted that to let it not be a large, yellow, ugly industrial building
I
forever.
understand. Actually took a tenant out of there at one point. So while we are asking for something, it doesn't have the pitched roofs and it doesn't address some of the residential nature that you see in a lot of other buildings in Mequon. It's not outside of the realm of our neighborhood. There are other buildings in our neighborhood like this. And as you make your way up and down Mequon or Port Washington Road, there are a number of other buildings that have this initial style. We know that it is going to be a commercial building. It's taking over a site that's been relatively historic in the Mequon area. Ferrante's has been here forever, and it is a residential style building in that area. But we did apply the materials that we applied to this building for a reason. I know that there's some concern that there's so many materials on here. There are 5. We have a baseline brick material, which is full face brick. It's a very high quality material. We're proposing full bed stone. The white material you see going up there is a very clean white natural stone material. We want the wood look, but we don't want the maintenance associated with wood look. So the wood material we're proposing for this facility is also on a number of other buildings as you make your way up Port Washington Road. If you're familiar with Starbucks on the corner of Port and Mequon, the wood material on Starbucks is the exact same product we're proposing here. It looks very nice, it looks very natural, but it's permanent. It is UV stable, doesn't require any maintenance, it looks good forever. And then the other material we have at the top is it is a decorative metal facade material. It gets used on nearly every commercial building that goes out right now. It is a very high quality. They actually upscaled the material that we're proposing on there. Again, permanent, very, very stable. We think the building has a very nice look to it. Staff came back to us. They were concerned about the fact that Port Washington Road did not have our primary entrance. Based on the size of our site and how we can orient our building, getting our main entrance on Port Washington Road is nearly impossible for us, so how our site needs to function. So we met a concern of staff, and we added, if you look at the west side of the building, we added the stone element on the west side of the building to add some additional visual to that facade at the request of staff, even though we can't have our main entrance in that position. So we think we have a very beautiful building. We don't think it has so many materials to look garish. And we're really excited about developing this site. I'll take any questions that you have.
I don't have any. I certainly appreciate the right-of-way dedication. That's going to make a remarkable improvement, hopefully, to that corner, and pull that sidewalk away from the traffic. It's a little dicey there right now. So that is a benefit. I'm certainly not the architecture guy up here, but maybe our architect is gone tonight, so we don't have anyone who's a real architect, but there might be a few opinions. Well, yeah, amateur architects. We've got 7 of those. Are there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Barnes.
Yeah. I will just report that I generally concur with what I see here. I think there's some valid wonderments on facade, but looks good because I view this as critical for the entrance to our city, for traffic coming in from the south, that the impression is proper and will look good for the city of Mequon coming in. Just one minor little detail that I saw just looking at it. I saw your discussion on the number of parking stalls and the level of business, number of customers, and that the not being able to fit as many parking stalls. I looked very briefly at your site plan, and without getting into the details, it looks like there might be some little tricks that I actually saw. You might be able to get another 3 stalls. Now, this sounds like a detail, and it probably is, but I'm always a believer that where it can be made feasible, you provide adequate parking for unforeseen circumstances, let alone future business beyond what you view to be the norm. So I won't get into the details beyond that, but I open it to just making sure that with some adjustments to the outside perimeter and the stall widths that are shown as 9 feet in some spots, I will bring this up elsewhere occasionally, but what is a common width used by a lot of cities is 8 feet. And there are some states in the country where it's even 7 feet. So
We actually did work with staff on that as well. We show 9 feet, which is pretty much the standard for southeastern Wisconsin. But we do have a number of spots on site. I talked with Jack initially when we were doing our site planning because we were so tight. We do have a number of compact spaces that are at 8 feet on the northeast corner of our property.
So all I'm trying to suggest is maybe might be another 3 stalls. It's not crucial, but it could be beneficial for broadening the use. That's all.
Thank you. I'm not seeing it, but I'm not a traffic engineer.
Widening the exterior a little bit.
Well, I think we're boxed in. We're boxed in by road right away to the west and the south, and I think we're at lot lines pretty much to the north and east. It's a postage stamp, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very tight. No question about it.
Commissioner Schaefer. Oh. Commissioner
do we have
Stoker
any
by way
other
of Commissioner
areas,
Schaefer.
or do we have any other instances where we've got private ownership landscaping on dedicated land, and how does that work for maintenance if it's not maintained?
Most of the situations we have where this comes up is on residential properties where there's like an old subdivision that didn't dedicate, and then they dedicate it, and they have their monument sign with landscaping around them. Basically, the agreement just basically says that if we need to go in there and do any kind of work, we're not responsible for putting it back. They can maintain it as long as they're able to. If they don't maintain it, it still falls upon the site plan approval and the landscaping plan approval. So they can't use the excuse that we don't own it to say we don't no longer can maintain it. So they still have to maintain it. The biggest difference is, again, if we have to go in there and throw a gas main in or a sewer main or a water main or something like that, we won't replace it for them. But I don't anticipate any of that happening in this area here. I think most of the utilities are in place right now. Like I said, the only thing that would be maybe someday if there was a dedicated right turn lane, that might impact some of it, but most of that area will be dealt with when we talk about with the Port Washington road improvements that'll have the impact on, not the private developers' landscape around the building.
And staff did ask us to shift our whole site to the north 5 feet to give a little bit more room along Dodges Bay Road. We've agreed to that. The plans you see in front of you today don't reflect that, but our engineering is working on making that shift as well.
Commissioner Strelchak.
Thanks for the great description. So the site plan, I totally agree with everything that you've said, just in general from the site plan. If you can add 3 spots and you can get creative to add 3 spots, great. You know, I'm also supportive of future use for any site, and you know, just to make it feasible for the tenant now and maybe the tenant into the future. But what I see before me, I really like. I too agree with you that I would have liked to have seen some kind of an entrance on Port Road for you. But again, I just don't know how that would work, and it makes sense that it's off of Dodges Bay Road. And I think it'll be actually safer for your customers going in and out. Maybe the only challenge is like just in the morning, that left turn in, on occasion as schools are going from, point A to point B, just people getting into that lot early in the morning. So, Mayor Nurbin would have better insight because he drives that path daily multiple times. My question for you came really as it relates to the building. The logoing shown on the top of the building, is that intended to be on the building? Because I don't see a call out whether there's any logoing on the building in the sign plan. That would, to me, be considered a sign and not something that's allowed. So I just don't want any confusion between the picture and what you think you're going to be putting on the building.
So what we've submitted to you tonight does not include any kind of an ask for signage approval. All we are trying to do is we are trying to illuminate to staff and to the commissioners where the possible opportunities for signage might be. We would come back to you under a separate application with where and what we're going to place on the building for signage at that time. So we're just trying to help you understand what our intention is to place something on Dodges Bay Road. It has not been completely vetted yet. The size of the sign, the colors of the sign, what you see there today are just the owner's current logo. So we're just trying to help you understand some concepts, but we are not looking for an approval on that tonight, sir.
Okay. I know that we denied Lakeside Development and their request for a tenant sign higher up on the building, and that we preferred that to be over the first story windows in previous. So just in your planning, just know that we've denied it for other people. And that trend may continue depending on the height of it. I think the height was the height and the square footage were the two things that worked against that applicant. Just to share a little bit of info. You're also showing several windows on the outside, and I'm aware that this is a medical facility. I'm going to highlight for the fact that we have a dental facility here in Town Center, and we had a lot of back and forth. They loved the windows. They wanted their patients to be able to see outside, and they just absolutely would love it. And then all of a sudden, the HIPAA concern came up after the building was constructed, and that approval was there. So I'm going to highlight for you those. What I don't want to see on those windows is shaded out windows, during, all day, most days. Other aesthetic facilities that I've seen that have done quite well have had more of a grand entrance and more of a grand entryway to get the light into the building to give that aesthetic, coming in the building. But then the treatment rooms were then had either smaller windows that were high up where it wouldn't be a concern for HIPAA, as well as just in general, it still ended up tying in nicely with the building. Any thoughts on that? And then I have one more question after that.
So the applicant currently occupies a building very, very similar to this in their current location. They have very large windows in their facility now, and there are shades there, but the shades are not closed all the time. You may have to close the shade once in a while for a procedure, but then the shades open up again, the natural light. It's part of the feel of going into a facility like this. The intention is not to close those shades and have them shut all day. Will you see that once in a while? You see that in a business when someone's having an online meeting and that the glare is on the TV too much. You might have some of that, but that is not the intent to close all that off. A lot of those large windows on the ground floor are in reception and the waiting area, in the owner's office, in suite. Upstairs, some of those larger windows are in a training facility that they have that they operate off hours for their staff. So you're going to see a lot of that stuff is open. You will now and again see some shades closed, but it's not a permanent situation.
I'll also comment on the architecture. That was one of the things that I saw that I just thought was very busy. I was concerned with the amount of exterior features to it without a lack of depth to the architecture. It is kind of a square box with a bunch of different really cool colored stuff on there. I know that you're comparing it to a couple square roofed buildings nearby, but if you look one building further north, you've got, the Fiddleheads building that are all solid brick with a standard roof. If you go to the south and to the west, you've got the Lakeside buildings, and you've got everything else that's surrounding you with that look. What I don't want to see is several of these, buildings like right on corners that are square and just really don't have that deeper depth. They look contemporary, and my concern that over time they're going to look dated first compared to some of the more classic architecture that I've seen in the city. I'm not expecting you to build a home or something that's, like that on the corner, but something in between, commenting on what staff's feedback was. I would like to see a little bit more lean towards the staff recommendations or concerns in that area.
So I understand that concern. You mentioned Fiddleheads. I believe, I'm not from Mequon, but I believe there's two new buildings where Fiddleheads is located. One of them has a pitched roof. The other one has a flat roof, and they're both brand new, or they're within the last 3 or 4 years. So in that development, they saw fit to have one or the other. As far as being dated materials, we have face brick, we have natural stone, and we have a material that mimics very well. And we provided this to staff, the material, and we've showed staff photographs of structures we finished recently that mimics natural wood. All those types of materials are not going to be dated anytime soon. You mentioned brick on the other building. A building does not need to be solid brick to have that depth. Having brick as a baseline element with another element above and stepping back a very short amount is a very natural way for a building to be designed. If you guys ever had a residential home with a brick base and a siding upper portion of your building, it would have a very same depth feel that our building has with our lower and upper section. The stone element projects out of the building quite a bit and adds a lot of depth. We feel like we've provided some very high quality materials that are going to stand the test of time here. It does not have the slope roof. It doesn't have some of the more residential feel that you see in some structures, but we feel very, very comfortable and feel very confident that this building has a lot going for it.
Can you highlight which building has a flat roof and the Fiddleheads? I'm looking at the street view and Fiddleheads.
It's the one just to the north, actually.
There's about half a mile to the north of us. There's two strip malls right next to each other. One of them has a flat roof and one of them has a pitched roof. And I might have my Fiddleheads mixed up with another structure, another restaurant over there. But
Seeing a combination of two on one building. They've got two peaks in one. On the Foreman Fitness building, they've got a flat and two peaked roofs. I'm a no-go on the square building. It's a no vote for me. I don't care for the architecture, and I don't think it really lends itself to the gateway to the residential neighborhood. So you've got your position, and I've got mine. I'd like to be a little more supportive, and I'm asking for a little shift towards what staff's recommending. Because for every flat roof that we're picking out, I can pick out two that have peaked roofs.
I understand.
Well, I'm by no means the architecture police, but I will say this: if we want more gabled roofs and things like that, we ought to create a design guide and write it into our code somehow. It just becomes confusing for applicants what is allowed, what's not allowed, because we do have a mix. And I see the building right here that they're talking about. Just to the north, you've got gabled roof here. That's actually Foreman Fitness, and the one just to the north, which was built just about the same time. Well, it's recently reconstructed, yeah.
I do understand that some of the, we did look at if I look in your ordinance, section 58556, architectural requirements and standards, building and roof lines and roof shapes. All it states is that visual continuity of roofs and their contributing elements, parapet walls, which are on square buildings, copings, cornices, etc., shall be maintained in the building development or redevelopment of that building. It doesn't say the building has to have a pitched roof. It does actually state in there that parapets are part of are a permitted roof element. That's what we have here. So I'm not asking for anything the ordinance doesn't allow, but the ordinance does allow this.
Who was first? You want it, Commissioner Urbani?
So first of all, thank you for buying this property. I'm really excited to have a great tenant moving up here. I think it's a great location, close to the new entrance, and like people driving up from our new interchange at Port Washington will see this a really well-respected business in a fabulous location. I love the right-of-way. I come down Donges Bay all the time, and people honk at me because I'm not tight up against that center line so they can go around me to the right. I'm like, there's no lane there. So I'd love a lane there.
You should move over. That's me. I'm just kidding.
I am, anyway. Don't get me started on staying in your lane. I think the architecture it's not my style. I am very traditional, like traditional architecture, but I can get behind the arched windows. I can get behind the box look, but not in conjunction with the multitude of facades. So you said there's only 5. I think that's 3 too many, in my personal opinion. There's another building that's fairly new on Port Washington Road that has way too many, in my opinion, and I think that's what makes it dated. Not that those materials will be dated at any point in time, but the combination of them together could be dated more rapidly than you want. and I think it's the combination of all of those things which leads to Commissioner Strelchak's dislike of the box look. I mean, I'm putting words in his mouth, but like all of those things, the arched windows being not as consistent as we're used to, the box and the facades together make it really hard to get behind. So I think Commissioner Chorin offered to sit and work with you in his email, and I think that's a great idea. He's the architect who's not here tonight. I trust his opinions, and I agree with all of the conditions written in by staff.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Schaefer.
Yeah, that was Commissioner Urbani said a lot of what I was going to say. Thank you is a big part of what I wanted to say, and I assume the people sitting behind you are a part of this, unless you're just holdovers from Fish Hatchery and you're just interested in what we have to say.
They are my client. They will be running the business.
Okay, thank you for considering. This is not an easy parcel. Neither of those two that are on either side of Dungeness Bay are easy parcels, and so I think it's great that you're considering and trying to work within what is there. I was going to say the same thing. I don't know how to best propose this, but I think we're all going to have, many times when we talk about architecture, we have many different opinions, and yet we have one person who is actually trained as an architect on this board. He happens not to be here. I trust his opinion, and I would defer to him as far as what is perhaps a happy medium between what you're looking for and some of the staff recommendations. And so I'm trying to figure out how, I don't know if that's amenable to you. You haven't met him. He's a neat guy. I think you'll like him. He's good at understanding what, kind of what the look and feel is. That's, he's good at, I think he will be good at finding some sort of compromise. I might be selling him, I'm really selling Marty right now. But I do think that it would be worth the time to have that discussion. I don't know how to best propose that, though, and I don't know if you're amenable to that or not. This is a hard line for you as far as the architecture, and there's no...
Obviously, a hard line doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us anywhere with you. I mean, it doesn't work for us when the city has a hard line on something like this either. There's not a lot of architectural design guidelines in the zoning ordinance. It doesn't specifically negate what we're proposing here. It doesn't specifically allow it.
Yeah.
And we're looking for, and I understand that we'll have to work with staff as best as we can to try to come up with something if the planning commission doesn't approve what we have tonight. And so
it could always be a motion to approve contingent upon review with
the architect.
With
that's
the
a
architect
part
of
of
the
the
planning commission. And if we can't come to terms, you can always bring it back here and force us to make a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have two options: to either approve it with condition that Marty reviews it and is acceptable with the modifications, or you table it, and bring it back with Marty reviewing it prior to bringing it back. So
I just hate tabling it if
it
we
all
could work it
depends
out other
on
ways. So.
yeah.
our preference would be not to table it. If
Yeah.
we can approve the use and the site plan and things like that, move forward and work with staff and the other commissioner on architecture to come up with something that would be a positive step.
That sounds dangerously close to a motion. I agree.
Yeah, I would. You made the motion, I think. I would move to approve per staff's recommendations with the additional condition that there's dialogue between staff, the applicant, and our resident architect on the commission in hopes of kind of coming to some additional agreement on the building. Is that right, Jack?
Second, but I want to make sure that we're adamant that Marty agrees to this. Do we want to see it again, the building?
I think Marty
I defer
offered.
to Marty, but you may feel differently.
I think Marty did offer.
I know he offered, but do we want as part of the motion for Marty to agree, or it comes back?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I think the motion is to have them meet and come to some sort of agreement, and if they can't come to an agreement, they'll come back
And
to us
perhaps it
without an
comes
agreement. But if there is an agreement, it just goes forward with no need to come back.
Yeah, it needs to be more specific. I know what you're trying to do, but not
Okay.
so-
So I would say then that the additional condition would be that the architect, the applicant, and city staff meet and come to agreement on what the building should look like. If agreement is not reached, then the building would have to come back and we would be forced to make a decision. Is that
Just on the architecture, but not the whole use.
No,
and
just the
everything. Yeah,
architecture.
yeah.
Yes. Now we
Still,
good?
still a second, yes.
Commissioner Stoker.
Can I suggest that we include Marty and staff? Frankly, I actually think the building is acceptable as is, and not that I don't trust Marty, but I would rather have multiple eyes on it rather than just Marty making a final decision.
I thought I said Marty and staff and applicant, and if I didn't, that's what I meant.
Are you volunteering? I think you're a good balance to Marty. Yeah. The more practical, I mean, not the part Marty's not practical, but being in the building industry and having some appreciation for what Marty might be asking for is an appropriate yin
Kim's
to the
going to
yang.
correct how this was said, I feel like. Tell me, Kim.
No, good evening. I'm just concerned that none of us here tonight know what direction this is going to take.
Yeah.
And where we're going to land on some consensus. And we could achieve consensus, but it could look completely different than what we see here tonight or what anybody's expecting. And I think that dilutes Planning Commission's authority on architecture. It could get built by, the approval of 3 people, and all of you could go out in the field and not like it. And in Planning Commission's name is on it. So I support the idea of giving the business and the applicant, the assurance that the use is great, the site plan's great, the building placement's great. That gives them confidence to know that they can move forward with their business planning and financing, hopefully, and that we can make this a minor agenda item as soon as possible on the Planning Commission agenda. I'm happy to, waive that fee so long as it's, we're achieving some consensus and getting back to the Planning Commission. There really isn't any specificity about what the Planning Commission wants to see changed. That gives us no greater direction than what we had when we came here tonight.
So your recommendation would be to approve everything but table the architecture element only, but approve all other items.
Yeah. And then waive the fee.
That's pretty close to functionally the same thing.
So the next
Just you have to
planning
come
meeting is
see us
October 23rd. So we're
From a submittal perspective, obviously making the modifications we need to make, getting materials back to staff, getting it on the agenda. Is there some flexibility on the submittal?
I think we could even be
deadline to get
flexible on the
onto-
timeline.
We can, and we do not have a meeting in November. So let's work hard to pull this together in some time to get it back for the October meeting. Or we can always call a special meeting if we need to.
Wouldn't need to see anything here until right before the packet goes out the week before. So there's usually more of a lead time. I know Kim wants as much time as possible. But
Well, the application deadline for the October Planning Commission meetings is technically today. So obviously you're not
consider
meeting
yourself
that.
compliant. Yeah.
Obviously we will, assure you a spot on that agenda. I think we internally can work out how to get stuff pulled together in time for packet distribution. And we can also talk about how to show concepts that are getting us to what the final look is going to be.
We'll be reasonable with timeline,
Yeah.
and I can ultimately control the agenda as much as staff doesn't want to admit I can. So we'll get you back on, but I know we need a little time to get it into the packet, but we know this is kind of putting a crunch on you, so we'll be reasonable.
So now, okay.
Well,
So we need a different
it's a
formal-
different motion, yeah.
It is a different motion, but
Yeah.
I can try to make it. But
So
I
should I make a second with a friendly amendment that we,
think it's a whole new motion, actually.
yeah, we can simplify.
Start over from
So
scratch.
I
It's
would
cleaner.
move approval per staff's recommendations, with the exception of tabling the architecture of the building, with the assumption that that's going to be fast-tracked for the October 23rd meeting. And you guys got to tell me if there's something else I'm saying that I need to say legally, but I think that's the intent. See? And that still allows for time for the architect, staff, and the applicant to discuss, and then bring it back forward because we'll get a final review of it.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. All right. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And it is approved as amended. Sorry to see you next month, but I'm sure it'll go well.
Thank you.
That brings us to our announcements. The next meeting, as we just discussed, is Monday, October 23rd, right here at 6 o'clock. That just leaves one final motion. Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.